When we think of the story of Pokémon, we tend to picture the success tales of acclaimed champions, a world of happy endings. But there's another side to it. Parallel to the heroes and their countless feats, we also find the rivals. Characters a lot more human, and things are not always easy for them, and often the unavoidable brilliance of the player is what eclipses all their dreams and aspirations. I've been wanting to talk more about these characters for a long time, and this may be an original and interesting approach to that. Which Pokémon rival suffered the most? The first of these characters that the franchise offered us was Blue. From the very beginning, he's introduced like the one who was destined to be the protagonist of the story, the one that would get all the attention. He's Oak's grandson, the world's most famous professor. With that family background, he would learn about Pokémon from even before he was old enough to remember it, completes the Pokédex at a frenetic rate, clears all the gyms before us, and is the first to face the newly founded Pokémon League, becoming the world champion. In other words, he would be the protagonist of any story in which the player didn't exist. But it's precisely in red, the embodiment of the player, that he encounters a wall he cannot overcome. Someone who came out of nowhere, with no experience with Pokemon, messing up his plans over and over again. The melancholy in his words as he talks about training Pokemon during the second generation events hints at all the frustration he had to deal with. The young Blue, now as an adult, is someone much more thoughtful, who already abandoned the idea that he's entitled by fate to be the best. And he was even humble enough to take it down a notch and assume the role of gym leader, to study Pokemon with a more open mind. It's a bittersweet ending, and the character had to swallow a pill with that same bitter frustration. In the second generation, a young boy was looking through the window at the Pokeballs with Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile. He felt anger fill his entire body as he thought about how they were probably a gift for some spoiled child out there. Someone like him would never receive anything so special. After witnessing how his suspicions were confirmed, he decided to act. Silver is, in many ways, the opposite of Blue. While the latter seemed to be destined to be a trainer the likes of which the world had never seen, and as such had every possible advantage, Silver was all alone. But one thing they have in common is the blind chase of that ideal of strength. In the post-game of Leaf Green and Fire Red, a scientist mistakes us for Giovanni's red-haired kid, a fact that first pointed to this character as the son of Team Rocket's leader, something that makes him stand even further apart from the previous generation's rival, given his family background. After having seen his father's ambitions destroyed, and being abandoned by him and forced to survive by his own means, Silver would become unhealthily obsessed with individual strength and power, as the events of the game repeatedly dragged him down and reopened his wounds. Under the player's influence, who through just battles teaches him that strength is not everything, we see one of the greatest evolutions for this character, and that ends up convincing the professor himself to give Silver the Pokemon he stole, after seeing the bond he ended up forming with it. But with the tough childhood and solitude that he is supposed to have endured, his life was far from easy. In the third generation, we play as brand new arrivals in the Hoenn region, where we quickly make friends with May or Brendan, Pokemon lovers who are lucky enough to have the most important professor in the region as their father? It sounds like an almost flawless setting, and it's not like the character faces any hard situations either, nor do their defeats against the player seem to matter a lot to them. The lack of any serious conflict means that their development is practically non-existent. Thankfully, we find another rival in these games that is just the opposite. Wally has, arguably, the worst conditions of any of the rivals to date. Blue had everything in his path to become the great trainer he turned out to be. Silver, with an absent family, had it a lot harder, but at least the fire of revenge fueled his ambition for power. Wally, on the other hand, is introduced to us from the start as a sick child with breathing problems. That alone would make his life challenging, but the essence of the character is his great passion for Pokemon battles. That's where the conflict arose, because in light of his delicate health, his parents became extremely overprotective, refusing to let him become a trainer or travel around the world. world, fearing that his illness would worsen. Norman, a very smart guy who surely was aware of the situation and Wally's potential, would talk to his family about the therapeutic benefits of living with Pokémon, to which his parents would be a little more flexible, letting him keep Ralts. But that was it. Nothing about a journey through the world, as is evident from the fact that the second time we met Wally, he had barely been able to level up his Ralts, as his parents barely let him leave the house. When he moved to Verdanturf Town for its clean air, good for his sickness, Wally decided to leave, and did so in a way that his father never even knew about it. This means that he would never have accepted the dreams of the young trainer, the hardships inherent to his condition, the disapproval of his family, and, to top it all off, the fact that when the character manages to heroically overcome all this, you show up at the doorstep of his dream to crush him when he was about to achieve it, to teach him that sometimes all efforts and bravery in the world are useless when you have in front of you someone talented who gets everything from the start. In the remakes, this story was retold in a much more sugar-coated version, with a supportive father and a much less abrupt and cruel ending. But I still think that Wally's story in the original third generation is one of the rawest we have seen in the franchise. Barry is quite the antonym of sorrow and suffering. He's one more of those characters with an unbreakable smile, whose passion is boosted by being related to celebrities. In this case, he's the son of a legendary trainer. His story has some interesting moments, but as far as the video is concerned, suffering and how it promotes the character's evolution, there is little of it, at least with the things we see directly, or we can get a hint of it. Ironically, he has a Munchlax. It's one of the Pokemon that requires the most patience to catch in the history of the franchise, so as a character that is well known for his impatience, he surely didn't have a good time with it. Cheren appears to represent, once again, the most classic version of this archetype. His drive to seek power at all costs echoes that of the rivals of the first two generations, although he presents a side a lot more kinder than them. But don't let that cordiality fool you. He's probably even more lost in that blind pursuit. Blue chased with blind faith that self-prophecy of destined to be the best, and Silver tried to gather strength at any cost in order to crush everyone, to avoid facing his traumatic past. But Cheren was looking to be strong for no compelling reason, just because that's what trainers are supposed to do. He's a character without a goal. Cheren is frustrated when he loses, but confused when he wins, and doesn't feel as satisfied as he's supposed to. The story could have ended way badly for him, but he was lucky enough to come across one of the wisest and most experienced characters in the series, Alder, who would quickly spot those concerns and help him raise the right questions. However, during the events of the game, we see him trapped in a labyrinth from which finding a way out is not easy at all. Our other childhood best friend had to deal with completely different dilemmas, starting at her home. Like Wally's father, hers was opposed to the idea of Bianca going on a Pokémon journey. I would even say that he was even more intransigent given the way he talks to his daughter. She definitely had to go through strong arguments and rough moments at home. This time, it's the leader Elisa who steps in, proving the skills of this region's leaders to handle this type of situation. After her intervention, the family circumstances improve, and both father and daughter learn to compromise, with him allowing Bianca to continue with her journey, and Bianca showing more consideration for her family. But that doesn't mean that everything was easy for Bianca from then on, because from the beginning of her journey, she had been experiencing a feeling of inadequacy when faced with her companions. She noticed that she wasn't making as much progress as they were, and that the battle passion didn't burn in her with the same intensity. Gradually, she would come to understand herself and realize that what really moved her was to take care of Pokémon, to learn from the bonds between them and their trainers, and to shine a bright light in the lives of others. That's why in the sequels, she would start her path as a professor's apprentice. What can we say about N? Born with a prodigious gift for understanding the hearts of Pokémon, fate would make him cross paths with the nefarious Getsis at a very young age. N was isolated, abused, deceived, and used from his early years, and at the climax of the game, his world of ideals crumbled. I think there aren't many cases of suffering that can be compared to him, but that's precisely what makes him such a powerful example of hope. Someone who had descended into hell and keeps going, looking for the formula for a better world. In the sequels, Black and White 2, we meet Hugh. He's another of the rivals who seemingly fit the classic archetype of the young, slightly edgy battle enthusiast seeking power at all costs. And the reason why he wants that power remains rather a mysterious and indeterminate matter at the start. But when we see the visceral hatred with which he reacts when Team Plasma enters the picture, we start to understand where things are going. It turns out that 5 years ago, Team Plasma stole his sister's beloved Purloin. This was an extremely traumatic experience, as at the time, he was just a helpless child who could do nothing but watch his little sister's happiest moment being destroyed. It's a simple but very powerful explanation for why this character would be obsessed with becoming strong, so that no one would ever steal the smiles of his loved ones again. We've been observing villainous teams stealing Pokémon since the first editions, but the way the game shows us the impact of their actions on the characters in the story is something novel. Usually, the villainous teams are involved in specific incidents, and once the protagonist does their thing and the organization is dissolved, everything seems to be magically solved. However, in these games, you can see that they made an effort to show that our deeds have unexpected consequences. Team Plasma's actions really hurt the bond between people and Pokémon, and those are wounds that don't heal from one day to another. Let's face it, the 6th generation was not exactly a peak in this topic. It's even debatable whether there are characters that fall into this category. Rather than rivals, it seems that for this generation, they wanted to tell a story about how encounters define our lives, falling a lot more in line with the conventions of Kodomo anime. You know, the small group of friends looking for adventure. A particularly shocking approach, given the drama we came from, and quite paradoxical for games with the older protagonists, but there would be nothing wrong with that if they had given them development. They even have quite original hobbies and quirks. But as for the purpose of this video, it's a group immersed in an immaculate and innocent childhood, with practically no doubts, difficulties, or moments in which they show their true face. But Alola would be a different story, because Hugh and Lillie are precisely examples of that same archetype of friends, but properly done. Friends who get to know each other for a summer adventure, one that will change them forever and make them inseparable. Lillie is the youngest daughter of Lusamine, who, driven insane by her husband's disappearance and Nihilego's mental manipulation, began an unstoppable descent into true madness, from which Lillie took the worst part, to the point where she would confront her, running away from Ether Paradise with Nebby to try to stop her horrible plans. Losing her father at such a young age is not the only thing she had to deal with, as the fact that Lusamine started making her inner circle dressed like the Ultra Beast she became obsessed with is the game's subtle way of showing the family drama Lillie was subjected to. That makeover, which may seem like the typical cliché scene of the character being reborn, has a lot of meaning in this case, because it symbolizes the break with that traumatic past, the moment at the end when she asks, when did she start becoming beautiful? It's very powerful, as the real Lusamine speaks and sees through her eyes the real Lillie, and not the puppet she wanted to make of her in her trance, showing us that there's hope for the antagonist. And it's one of those unusual cases where the hardships don't stop even after a happy ending. Lusamine, though beginning to show signs of recovery, is still suffering from deep psychological wounds at the end of the game, and the girl faces the situation and travels to a distant region in order to find a cure for her mother. Hugh is one of the most innocent on the list. He loves Pokémon and adventure in the purest sense, and becomes so strong simply because training and battling is fun. But that fecklessness and inclination to do things just for fun ends up having its consequences, and when it starts to affect not only himself, but also the people he cares about, something changes in him. During the game, he learns that having fun is not enough. We need something deeper to guide our actions. The contrast he creates with the rest of the generation's rivals, who are among those with the hardest lives, is especially interesting, and precisely this opposite situations makes him develop insecurities and doubts that he must face, and eventually, at the end of this adventure, transform him into a real trainer with a great potential ahead of him. Don't think that I've forgotten Gladion. If Hugh was capricious and feckless, Gladion is his total counterpart. He throws all problems on his shoulders and goes out of his way for the people he cares for, showing, at first, that he's totally unwilling to share responsibility and trust in others, which, of course, ends up being problematic as well. This boy carried the same painful past as the rest of his family: the rejection of the whole region when he joined Team Skull, the worry for his sister, the aftermath of his mother's mental wounds, and more, alone and without sharing this burden with anyone. As the game comes to a close, he begins to open up a bit with the rest of the group, but it's clear he has a lot of work ahead of him. Trace is still here? You can't suffer if you don't have a personality. Apart from that, the relevance that Game Freak would give to these characters would not wane, quite the opposite. In the 8th generation, we would find new visions of this archetype. Bede can't catch a break. As if growing up in an orphanage wasn't challenging enough, constantly got into fights and had a lot of problems socializing with others because of his violent and inconsiderate personality. He formed very few effective bonds, so it's not a surprise that when someone trusted him for the first time, Bede put him on a pedestal. That's what happened when Chairman Rose gave him a Hatena and sponsored him for the gym challenge. It seems that at first it was a sincere act of kindness, since he was still a problematic child that a priori Rose had nothing to gain by helping. But the boy started to idolize his sponsor so much that he got obsessed with being useful to him, starting to stand out as a trainer, which would happen to coincide with the descent into madness of Rose, and Bede ultimately being used by him. It's unbelievably cruel how Rose, his hero and the only person he appreciates, looks down on him during the game. Putting ourselves in his shoes, they surely are not so innocent puns. For someone who has such rooted insecurities, every joke would only further deepen his issues. Thankfully, the gym leader Opal, who was about to retire, chose him as her successor. Although the game makes fun of this, I believe that in her, Bede found someone who truly appreciates him, and with whom he can finally learn the values of a trainer and begin to heal. Marnie's life, against what it may seem, has not been a bed of roses either. She was timid and a bit of a crybaby girl from Spikemouth, who nevertheless captivated everyone with her hypnotizing gaze from a young age. She had the aura to be a world-class star, and when the region's energy problems started to blow up and the town fell into dilapidation, all the locals put their faith in her as a ray of hope so that she would become famous and bring glory back to the town. As far as suffering is concerned, she's a rather neutral character. From a town that took the brunt of an energy crisis, it's clear that she went through her struggles, and being in the race to fame with such an introverted personality isn't easy, but the unconditional love and trust of her people makes up for a lot. The main trio of Galler's rivals is closed with our childhood friend, Hop, whose endeavors are no lesser. He carries the weight of being the younger brother of the world's strongest trainer on his shoulders. Hop was encouraged and motivated to surpass his brother since he was a child, and inspired by Leon, who always shows his best face to the cameras, he accepted that expectation always with his best smile. But once he starts his journey as a trainer, something is off. Under the mask of his eternal smile, Hop is empty. He acts in an erratic, insecure, and fragile manner. Following the dream of others instead of finding his own makes him lack a solid base of values to hold on to, and at the slightest change, he collapses. Like what we see after the incident in which Bede laughed at Hop, driving him to replace his beloved Wooloo. Hop echoes strongly with everyone who has felt lost at some time in their lives, doing things to fit in, and turning our backs on our inner child. In the end, being at the top of the trainers in the region, with an all-powerful legendary in his team, his final decision is to stop battling and try his luck as a Pokémon Professor Apprentice. This was seen by part of the community as a sudden and absurd twist, but actually it's quite the opposite. It represents the exact moment when Hop breaks free from his chains. He no longer wants to surpass his brother as everyone expects and begins to forge his own path. One of the most relatable and personal stories we've seen in the series. No wonder it inspired even one of the legendary heroes. Gen 9 time, which would completely beat my expectations in this area with, for me, the most complete and interesting group of rivals. Nemona is an energetic girl who certainly was lucky compared to the rest. She comes from a wealthy family, although during the journey to Area Zero, she seems to avoid the topic of her parents, which ultimately was left as a mystery. Does she have any problems with them? But the game is a lot more explicit with the pain of Penny, aka Cassiopeia. After suffering severe abuse and bullying at the academy, she thought of the best way to make sure that no one else would ever experience such a thing again, and had the brilliant idea of founding Team Star, where all the students who were abused would unite to intimidate the bullies and create a bullying-free academy. One of my favorite aspects of the game is how they use subtle details of design and characterization to explain why the leaders of Team Star were bullied. Penny is an amalgam of all those hobbies and traits. That's why she understood them so well and was able to form an unbreakable bond with everyone, even without showing up and staying in the shadows. But for that very reason, she was also probably the one who was treated the worst of all, to the point of deciding to found the team. Even with that, Arven has the most overwhelming story of this generation. Everything that we know of this character's life involves dealing with very difficult situations. Growing up with his mother, or father depending on the version, his other parent was absent for unknown reasons. Even so, he managed to have a rough but relatively happy childhood, joining his mother in her research of the great crater of Paldea. At some point, his mother would lose her way, becoming obsessed with her studies and paying less and less attention to her son. His only glimmer of light during that period was the warmth and love that his Mashif gave him. And, in a cruel paradox, it was seriously wounded by the attack of one of the mysterious beings that appeared due to his mother's experiments. Sick of the whole thing, and confronted with her indifference and coldness, he ran away from the great crater in a flying taxi and began his journey in search of the legendary Herba Mystica in the hope that it could heal the wounds of his beloved Pokémon. He managed to do it, but Arven still had to face the biggest challenge of his life, uncover the reason for his mother's coldness, because all this time it was not her, but an artificial intelligence supplanting the identity of the real professor, who died protecting the legendary. Something that he seemed to suspect, but that fact doesn't make it any less heartbreaking that, in her farewell, the artificial intelligence with his mother's feelings asks for his sincere forgiveness, and she lets Arven know that he always was everything to the professor, and all her research and obsessions were to create a paradise in which they could live together happily. Arven's life has been a constant challenge, with some of the hardest circumstances a person can face. Yet, he has always been kind to others and caring for his loved ones. As we've seen throughout the video, the lives of the rivals are not devoid of hardships, but Kieran is the first to be so expressive and transparent in how these affect him. Prior to the events of the DLC, the character already had strong insecurities that are not directly explained to us, but between the lines it can be read that they are related to his particular vision of the legends of Kitakami and his admiration for the ogre. That would bring him jokes and disdain from the rest of the kids, and to be honest, his sister's attitude doesn't help a lot in that sense. That's where you come in, appearing out of nowhere and being one of the few people who actually appreciated him. He starts to open up and become a little more confident, but in a rather cruel twist, the truth about Ogerpon is revealed to you, a newcomer to Kitakami who had no interest in the matter. Instead of him, who had been defending the mask Pokemon all his life, being the center of ridicule and scorn for it, you are the one who for no apparent reason gets all the praise and love of the ogre Pokemon itself, and to make matters even worse, this is hidden from Kieran by his own sister and by you, whom he considered the only person person he could trust, and sees this as a major betrayal. All these traumatic events in a short period of time poisoned his mind and made him obsess over the player, ergo, his mania in the second DLC to become strong at all costs to defeat us. A quest that has been seen very often in the rivals of the franchise, but never in such a real and human way. That's why the character is so expressive with his streaks of insecurity.
Like what happens when we send out Ogerpon during his battle, which he interprets as a deliberate provocation. And in a way, he's right, because a lot of players would use the ogre just to see his reaction. It all reaches its climax in Area 0 Under Depths, where once again, baby Terrapagus wakes up and goes to the protagonist, panicking Kieran as he watches the story repeat itself to the point of desperately throwing a Master Ball at it. The funniest part of it is that maybe Terrapagus didn't choose us or anything like that. The player was the first thing it saw when it woke up, so maybe it just headed towards us with curiosity. But Kieran's insecurities are so out of control at that point that he practically had no control over his actions. It's pretty clear by the end of the DLC that the character's wounds have not healed at all, but at least he begins to understand his emotions and that he must try his best to follow his own path. It's not the most heartbreaking story in the series, but it's certainly one of the best Game Freak has given us in this topic. Finally, Legends ZA introduced us Team MZ, a complete redemption for Kalos rivals. Naveen first comes across as someone pretty frustrated and tired of life. But honestly, who can blame him? He's a fashion enthusiast who arrived in Lumios thinking he'd immerse himself in the city of beauty and refine his craft, only to end up stuck in a dusty, half-abandoned hotel, forced to eat culinary war crimes while missing Canary streams because of the terrible Wi-Fi connection. And beneath the comedy, he's a character who really didn't have it easy. Even though he came to Lumios full of excitement because it was the fashion capital where his talent and passion for design could finally flourish, when he told his family about that dream, they opposed him, which ultimately pushed him to run away from home. Luckily for him, AZ, who knows perfectly well what it means to wander alone without direction, took him into his hotel, and suddenly, his obsession with Canary makes a lot more sense. Someone who represented his ideal of aesthetic taste and fashion, whose streams became his only refuge during something as painful as being rejected by your own family. His decisions, his Pokémon choices, the way he's always blunt with his comments, even when they might offend people. It all paints the picture of someone fighting to be himself, even when doing so comes with painful sacrifices. A determination so unbreakable that it genuinely makes me wonder if his Mega Evolution is special. Mega Scrafty materializes the fashion ideal inside him to the point where it resembles his jacket, so it almost feels more like Naveen's own unique form, kind of like Ash Greninja. Throughout the game, we see that his cold attitude is more of a shell he developed in order to survive a life full of rejection and hostility, but when it truly matters, he's always there to help, designing the team logo, joining us in dangerous battles against the rampaging Megas, even supporting us, reluctantly of course, during our rank up battle against Canary. Maybe, beneath all those looks of disgust, he actually found something within the protagonist group he could truly call family. Like Naveen, Lida arrived in Lumios because of her studies, but unlike him, she actually had her family support since she came to pursue her passion, dancing. It's heavily implied she followed in the footsteps of her older brother who, judging by everything, is Tierno, the XY rival who was also passionate with dancing. Like the rest of the team, her life hasn't exactly been a dance either. In Lumios, she shared an apartment with another dancer, but that roommate found success before her, got recruited by a talent agency, and left Lida alone, unable to afford the rent anymore, and eventually ending up at the hotel. Even so, her attitude is pure positivity. She's always smiling, always there to lift her friend's spirits during hard moments, all while holding on to her dream of becoming the greatest dancer the City of Light has ever seen. Taunie or Urbain
Urbain leads the team, and from the very beginning, we can see they're a character deeply marked by tragedy. Their mother died tragically when they were just a child, and since then, they've had to push forward alone, dealing with everything that comes with surviving by yourself in a huge city. We first meet Taunie trying to promote AZ's hotel, with the best intentions possible, but absolutely no success. And alongside Team MZ's missions, we see them searching for someone who knew their mother. It's only during the post-game that they finally succeed, when it's revealed that Jet was actually their grandmother, and the mother of the deceased woman, discovering it through the jacket she had left behind for her daughter. But we'll leave the mystery of her identity for another video. Throughout the game, we see details that seem like innocent jokes, but actually reveal just how deeply growing up alone affected her, from her culinary abominations, because nobody ever taught her how to cook, to her financial struggles when she ends up in debt after never properly learning how to manage her resources or avoid being scammed. But most importantly, we see it in her relationship with Team MZ, where everyone, in one way or another, feels lonely and lost, while Taunie becomes obsessed with being strong enough to lead them, guide them, and make sure they never have to go through what she did. A leadership role that becomes internally challenged once the protagonist starts questioning it, forcing her to confront those feelings directly. During the encounter with her grandmother, she's offered, perhaps out of guilt for leaving her alone for so long, the position of CEO of Quasartico, which honestly makes me question the future of the company considering her financial track record, but Taunie accepts, which means giving up her greatest passion, becoming a trainer, as well as leaving behind Team MZ, the thing that truly made her happy. At the end of the day, she does it because she knows it's what her mother and AZ would have wanted for her, making her, from beginning to end, a character who always puts responsibility first and is constantly willing to sacrifice herself for the sake of others.